Yeah. I'm following her. I got arrested. My daughter's mother at that time was pregnant with my daughter, and by the time I was convicted of this sentence, my daughter was 5 months old. When I first came home and rung the doorbell at my daughter's grandmother's house, and she ran in the basement and hid. And I just sat in the living room and gave her a room until she got comfortable. And I understood that her hiding wasn't from me. It was from the fact that she had never had her father be at the door.
Sit down. There's this thing I have no idea to where it's like a book and then that one of those near my
The federal agent and the confidential informant had called me to purchase some drugs. And, I said to myself, like, I really want to have a heart-to-heart with this guy I didn't know he was an agent at that time. And I met with him, and I didn't have any drugs. And, and I said to him, I said, like, I really don't want to be doing this, I'm really trying to, I've left this lifestyle, I moved away from the community, I have a child on the way. And I'll never forget, he put his arm around me. This federal agent, that I didn't know was an agent at that time, and said, listen, young man, you don't have to worry about anything. Just get me a key load, and, after that, we won't ask you for any more. He could have said, you know what, let's arrest this kid right now and put a stop to this. But his choice was to sort of really continue to solicit more drugs from me to try to get me to the point where if I would have, and I didn't get him that key load, fortunate enough, because I would have been facing a life sentence, and that would have took me away from my family for my entire life. And so I always reflect back on that, because it says to me how heartless this sort of cat and mouse game can be. In my case, I should have actually went to the federal system. Once they realized that I didn't have any criminal offender background, they bounded me over to the state. I remember being in a cell at the Kennedy building and hearing them talk about how after they sort of did my criminal history, they were saying, well, this kid's only gonna get 3 years, 8 months. Like, that's not gonna be enough to turn him over. He won't roll over for that or become an informant. And maybe about 45 minutes later, I was in a van being bounded over to the state, because on the state level, the mandatory 10 a day had been implemented. Really, the whole piece of it and me getting a mandatory sentence was around not being willing to become a government informant. People could sort of roll over, become an informant, work with law enforcement to help them sort of get what's supposed to be the bigger dealers. But in most cases, what people did was they might have pointed out someone who was a small level dealer. They might have pointed out someone who wasn't a dealer at all. But what it would do would give them room to sort of either get immunity from their sentence or get their sentence reduced. Being bounded over from a federal charge to a state charge so I could receive the maximum amount. And their hope and goal was that I would become a government informant by receiving that maximum amount. The back of the van opened when I got to Walpole, and it was a cloudy day, and there were like hawks flying above and seagulls. It was like death looming in the space. It was gray, gloomy looking. The wall, even though it was white, it was dingy. And there was this big metal door and these birds flying around the top. And all I could think about was death. I was like an A student in school from 1st to 5th grade. I got the honor roll every marking period. My mother still has those stacks of honor rolls from 1st to 5th grade that she holds daily. I was ranked in tennis. I was a positive kid. You would never thought that kid would have ended up receiving a 10-year mandatory sentence at some point, and even entering into a lifestyle that wasn't the best of behaviors. When I started looking at my past while I was incarcerated, trying to figure out how does that kid get to this place, I started to uncover these things. There are life circumstances that have led good human beings, that if you talk to children in schools who want to be a lawyer, who want to be a doctor, who grow up and make bad decisions. I remember my first social science course that talked about the hierarchy of needs. When I started understanding about the hierarchy of needs and how risk factors can lead to deviant behavior, and if you don't provide these hierarchy of needs, it actually creates societies and communities that are like, will default into sort of criminal activity. I was like, wow, so you mean to tell me we know this? Like, we know this stuff and we allow these circumstances to exist and think that we're not going to have people who make bad decisions? And taking that course opened my mind up in a sense of really realizing that we live in a society where I feel that is set up for communities of color to fail. I remember a young man when I was transferred to an institution called Concord, and a young man was raped, by a gentleman during lunch hour. And, basically he was pulled in a cell and raped, and these are the things that happen in prison. So every day in incarceration, there's a level of anxiety and stress and sort of navigating that a person goes through to just make it through one day at a time, so that they can make it to the day that they're going to be released. Most people don't make it. Some people hang themselves. Some people, end up taking a lot of drugs, going to the med line and taking drugs to make it through so that they can sort of black out in those circumstances. There's no safeguards for young men or young women who go into incarceration. I mean, we're at a place now in this country where we have, folks who are investing in building prisons and earning money off of prison population. And that didn't start just today. That started in the 90s. And then how are we going to fill these prisons? By creating laws. This all sort of has gelled together, right? The system working with investment, working with the prison industrial complex. And so, it's sad, but the reality is that that's not a conspiracy. This is a reality of the society that we live in. First and foremost responsibility of a faith community should be to focus on injustices in any society and advocate against those things. As a faith person and a God-fearing person, I'm not only stand here as a representative of myself and my family, but as a representative of one who supports God's love for humanity. I'm someone who was a recipient of this law, of this problem, and fortunate enough, I know that I'm only here because I'm supposed to be someone who's an advocate and at the forefront of speaking about this experience so more people can get involved. For those who this issue or these issues don't impact them directly, they have to understand that their voice is most significant. This can't just be about people who are impacted by this issue. It is the others, meaning that those who don't look like folks who are impacted, saying that we stand for justice, we stand for all, and we want to live in a society that is just. And so this movement with GBIO and bringing together the faith community is around an issue we know that is not just a Black and brown issue. This is a humanitarian issue. This is an issue that crosses all faiths. And we should, as faith-based individuals, have the courage to stand in the face of those who don't think that this is important because of faith, and fight with fervor to make changes in our society. And that's what this reinvestment movement is all about. In the name of God, the most gracious, the most merciful, grant us the strength and the fervor to stand up for those who are being left behind, those who are suffering because of this legislation. Give us the strength and move the hearts of those who sit in the position to make a difference. Touch their spirit through the advocacy, through the voices that you hear, through the experiences that are presented to them, to stand up and let us work together to create a change for our criminal justice system overall, and let Massachusetts be a staple for what criminal justice reform should look like and what correctional institutions should be doing in order to uplift and bring individuals who've lost their way back to society and be an asset not only to themselves and their family but to the society at large.